We've truly conquered the seas, and the enormous and vastly impressive ships we've created are the pinnacle of human engineering. Even though technology has allowed us to create the largest ships in the world with the most powerful engines, there are still times when nature beats even our best attempts, and when these behemoth vessels go down, it's a very spectacular, albeit frightening sight. Follow along as we take a dive into 10 of the most spectacular sinking ships of all time. Number 10. The Voici Bernadette. The Voici Bernadette is a gigantic cargo freighter with a dubious past and a long rap sheet of being caught smuggling drugs. It sank during a dramatic scene that looks like something straight out of a Hollywood blockbuster. The Bolivian freighter was donated by the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol and was commissioned to form an artificial reef. It was caught trying to transport 800 bricks of cocaine into the dock of Miami that were worth $35 million. After this was seized, the ship was loaded up with some 200 tons of concrete, and holes were cut into the hull of the ship to ensure it would sink. The former criminal vessel now had a new life as an ocean refuge for marine life, and it promises to become a great diving site in the near future. The scene was packed with over 200 boats that watched as the impressive vessel sunk to the bottom of the ocean, where it eventually came to rest 100 feet below the water's surface. Number 9. Flinterstar sinking. The Dutch Flinterstar violently sunk after a terrible collision with Marshall Island tanker that was one of the worst maritime disasters in the history of Belgium, where the ship went down with a total loss of its many hundreds of tons of fuel. The Belgium and Netherlands authorities were frantically trying to stop the oil leaking into the environmental waters of the North Sea, close a pristine coastal reserve in the area following the Flinterstar sinking. 12 crew members were forced into the frigid waters of the North Sea as their boat rapidly sank to the bottom of the ocean. But all of them were thankfully saved. It's not known what caused this horrific accident, but the incident is being thoroughly investigated by authorities to determine who or what is to blame for the tragic event. The accident occurred in a very busy shipping route as well. Number 8. The Yogi Superyacht. The Italian coast was the location of an incredibly sad sight, as a $14 million super yacht that was its owner's pride and joy disappeared beneath the waves in a dramatic scene. It's the largest yacht that ever sank, and it went down to a watery grave merely a year after it started traveling the seas. The crew was airlifted to safety merely minutes before the boat disappeared beneath the water, and there are still many more questions than answers regarding this terrible event. The yacht had the amenities of a world-class resort and was the most luxurious boat money could buy. The Yogi continued on its journey despite warnings of fierce storms and high waves that reached up to 16 feet. What happened to the super yacht that fateful night is a grim mystery that still puzzles the yachting world to this day. Mechanical failure or sabotage? It doesn't seem like we'll find the answers anytime soon, but that hasn't stopped the media and the public from speculating about it, since an official explanation has never been given. Number 7. MTS Oceanos. The MTS Oceanos was one of the most spectacular ships in its lifetime, and the sinking of the massive ship was one of the most dramatic episodes in the history of the Transkei in South Africa. The Oceanos was originally commissioned in 1952 and served the first part of its life as a passenger and cargo ship. The ship underwent massive reconstruction and went on to be an esteemed Greek cruise liner for many years. On a fateful August day in 1992, the Oceanos was on a cruise close to the coast of South Africa when it embarked on a voyage into a tumultuous ocean that was being battered by 40-knot winds. The ship was at the mercy of powerful waves and 29-foot-high swells, and that evening the ship lost power due to an explosion in the engine room, and that was the beginning of the end for the ship. Water promptly started entering the hull and flooded the generator room. Water started flooding the ship's main drainage system and rose like the tide inside the vessel as it poured out of every shower, toilet, and waste disposal unit. There was no hope and no way to save the ship, but thankfully all the passengers and crew were safely rescued by the South African Navy. Number 6. Stellar Banner. The Stellar Banner was one of the biggest ore carriers on the ocean, and had run aground with its last shipment of ore in 2020 and was unable to be retrieved and recommissioned. The impressive spectacle of its sinking is one of the most watched ship sinkings today. The ship had some prior damage, and running aground was the final nail in its coffin. Only 145,000 tons of its 306,000-ton load of ore could be removed successfully, and the damage to the ship was too immense to be fixed. So the only option that remained was to sink the ship. The stellar banner disappeared into the water off the Brazilian coast 3 months after it ran aground through its intentional sinking. It was found that the ship had deviated from its course prior to it getting stuck, and if the captain had stayed on the planned route, this entire disaster might have been avoided completely. The ship was sunk through cutting a hole in its side and letting the ocean take care of the rest. And even though it was an unfortunate event, it was an impressive sight. Number 5. Sinking of the Kraken. The Kraken was an immensely massive ocean vessel that measured in at 371 feet long and was the focus of the Texas Parks and Wildlife Department's artificial reef program. This meant that the vessel was intentionally sunk 67 miles off the coast of Galveston to give the natural reef systems of the area a much-needed boost. The crew spent upwards of an hour drilling holes into the ship, and after they opened the valves, the massive ship sunk to the bottom of the ocean floor in about an hour. It now lies at a depth of 140 feet beneath the surface of the Gulf of Mexico. There are very few naturally occurring reefs in this area, so this ship will become a major attraction for divers, as well as a haven for marine life. All the hazardous material that was inside the ship was removed and disposed of before it was repurposed for its new life as a reef that benefits the habitat greatly and increases the diversity of the marine species that now call it home. Number 4. U.S. Radford. The U.S. Radford was once a mighty Navy destroyer patrolling the seas, but after it had served its time, it was decommissioned and found a new purpose. In an almost $1 million project, the monster was intentionally sunk off the eastern coast of America and quickly became a hot new scuba diving attraction that lured people from all over the world. This was the longest ship ever to be sunk as an artificial reef, and the sinking went without a hitch. But sadly, the rest of the project was not quite so successful. It's thought that the ship sustained structural damage upon impact with the ocean floor. This weakening led to it breaking into 3 separate pieces when the worst hurricanes America has seen in half a century hit the coast. The ship was basically destroyed merely a year after it sank, and parts of the ship that survived the storm were separated by several hundred feet, so the reef sadly never got a chance to grow on this originally 563-foot ship. Number 3. HMS Annapolis. HMS Annapolis was an old Canadian destroyer and served the Royal Navy for 52 years. After it had reached the end of its life, it underwent a historic sinking and became one of 8 artificial reefs of British Columbia. There was a lot of preparation that went into making this decision, and many legal disputes were fought over the environmental concerns and the possible toxicity of the paint and the effect it'll have on the water. It was eventually ruled safe and declared as an artificial reef project that would form a long-term marine habitat. It measured in at 371 feet and showed signs of marine life and habitation a mere year after it was sunk. Sonar scans were done to ensure there weren't any marine populations close by when they detonated the once formidable warship, and it sunk to the bottom of North America's southernmost fjord. The wreck will become a scuba diving attraction once it's stable. Number 2. MV Rena Monrovia. The MV Rena was a massive container ship over 750 feet long that ran aground on the Astrolabe Reef in New Zealand and resulted in one of the worst oil spills the country's ever seen. The ship had this tragic accident due to navigational errors, and 2 of the ship's officers were jailed after admitting to mishandling of the ship and fraudulent alteration of the ship's documents. The massive vessel was traveling at scary speeds of more than 17 knots when it ran aground, and this would be the last careless mistake its captains would make. After being battered with bad weather, the ship broke in 2 and finally sunk to its final resting place, where it was completely reclaimed by nature. Even though this was the worst maritime disaster to ever happen in New Zealand, it wasn't all negative, because after the spill was cleaned up, the ship's remains turned into a thriving kelp forest that's now home to a large diversity of marine species. Number 1. Algoport sinking. The Algoport is a cargo ship that was built in 1979 and was being towed to a Chinese repair yard following damages sustained from ferocious storms on the ocean, and when the vessel was about a week away from its destination, it finally succumbed to the might of the ocean. The self-unloading bulk carrier had a capacity of over 30,000 tons and measured in at a whopping 650 feet in length. The Algoport was built by a Canadian company and cost over $250 million. Despite this massive investment that was lost when the ocean claimed it, there was luckily no loss of life or environmental damage that ensued from its fierce sinking that snapped the ship in half. It's an immense sight to see the monsters of the sea succumbing to the power of the waves, but even though it's a great financial loss for the ship owners, most sinking ships are luckily turned into artificial reefs that are a major help for the marine animals. Before you go, have a look at our other awesome videos on screen right now. And see you next time. See you next time.